Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and this is an announcement for my next video series. That is reading Aristotle's Politics. Finally, this is going to be my attempt to do the whole politics. We're going to be trying to do it chapter by chapter, book and chapter by chapter. So therefore, it should take a long time because there's 8 books and ranging usually 13. The largest, book 1 has 13 chapters, book 2 has 12, book 3 17, book 4 16, book 5 12, book 6 8, book 7 17, book 8 7. Okay, and actually, this is the point of the one of the things I've spent my life studying the politics. Um, is there? So um, I've written 2 books on the subject. I've got, my 2014, my 2004 book, sorry, LSU University, Louisiana University, Louisiana University Press, Aristotle's Best Regime, Kingship, Democracy, and the Rule of Law, 2004. This was kind of totally revised version of the dissertation. Did Northern Illinois. Much expanded from the dissertation in that sense. Um, it's still available. You can get copies. You can get hardback. So, and this is my 2016 book from Warsaw University Press that I did kind of. This is like a Illumina. This beginning point is called "The Centrality of the Regime in for Political Science." It focuses on kind of Aristotle's regime science. It was kind of like I called it my Polumina for Aristotle's politics, or Aristotle's regime science, my starting place, my groundwork for the regime science, my examination of the regime science, which is the book I'm working on now. It's the major book doing. It could actually be which focuses on book 4, 5, and 6 of the politics. A year or so ago, I did a we did a Zoom class with a lot of people, seminar, really seminar on a Zoom seminar about 2 years ago, where we went through books 4, 5, and 6, um, and before that 7 and 8. Um, which 7 and 8 is not recorded, and none of them were recorded. I don't think the politics stuff was recorded at all. Unfortunately, which we did. We only started recording something else we did. But I've always wanted to do this for online situation. And also, this ties in with the thing I just did this year, this August. My You can buy this. This is a notebook for Aristotle's Politics, a workbook, which is a study guide, a reading guide. I can't use Cliff's Notes for on Aristotle's Politics. That's would be copyright violation, but this is what it is. This is kind of like a study guide notebook, and it is designed um, that every chapter it's basically an outline with outline charts and things to help you read it's a study guide and an aid reading. It also allows you to take notes, a section so people can take notes. So if you're going to do this section, it'd be good to get this and use this as a kind of tool when you're doing with the politics. For the text we're going to be using Google Books online version of this, Lord's second edition of Hans Lord's second edition of this translation of the politics. In the 1980, he made the first edition, which was what that's other literal. It's kind of a literal translation. That is, it tries to get as close to the Greek text as possible. I could use what I could have done is we could have used the Greek text and studied all the Greek text, but I'd lose you all guys. It would be lost in that sense. I could use Perseus. We can go chapter by chapter by chapter with Perseus in the Greek, and it's watch. Lord is a. I have issues with Lord, and in fact, when I use it, I will correct it when I was going over it, in the sense that where things I disagree with his translation choices. You can, in the notes below, you can see I gave a link to where you can get Lord available. Lord is commonly available, Amazon, other places, paperback particularly. The You can access also, at least my Lulu thing I gave down there. I didn't link my other two items because you can find them on Amazon, so don't worry. Um, but I also put down there my review, link to my the review I did of the second edition for Brian Moore Classical Review. So I've studied. This is a book I've studied, not only this translation but also this text. I've studied all my academic life in that sense. I fell in love with it as an undergraduate. I mean, I kind of fell in love with undergraduate. I really fell in love with it as with my professor Leopold de Alvarez, who I dedicated with my wife. I know I'm not dedicated my wife, but also Leopold de Alvarez, who I studied. I studied Aristotle earlier at his undergraduate, and actually very detailed. These two or three different teachers of the politics. And one of the I can't remember his name. The professor was an ex-priest who was recovering alcoholic ex-priest, who was a Toronto PhD and was a very good. I studied he was in the philosophy department at Providence, not the politics department. I studied the politics and the ethics with him in a special course on social ethics, right? And then I had the politics as part of the classical political philosophy track. And I also had the politics as another course someplace else, I think, and it was another social philosophy course. And then I had a graduate student, and then a doctoral student later, studied with Mort Frisch, and Mort hated me because I knew my Greek and he didn't. Um, so this is a book I've struggled with, I've challenged with. I know, and I wanted to kind of put this on video so it's there. A version of this, a kind of podcast, a recording of a seminar I did in 2006, maybe 2008. I think, no, 2006. 2006 was around then. Is available on archive.org. Not all of it. I have it. I should put all of it up there, but I have some of it, or I think significant portions of it. The recording quality. It was the beginning of USB-based recordings. The recording technology was not the greatest. It was a group of three or four two or three students, doctoral students at the time, and we were going through the whole politics. And we were using. I was kind of working off the first edition of Lord. So what I'm doing here now for you guys is kind of like going through the whole politics, reading it and going over it. So that's the purpose of this course. The Politics is a very good book. It shaped. Well, it's a controversial book in that sense that some people argue that once it was written, it doesn't address things that will immediately make it irrelevant. Okay, the argument goes that it doesn't address it. Its focus is on the polis. The argument is, but then polis is with the rise of Rome and the rise of Alexander, the rise of global rule of these cosmopolitan regimes or these large empires or large nations. Okay, that these for Aristotle, the nation wasn't a political viable force; it was sub-political in that sense. It's something sub-political. So that the polis or the city was the only viable political entity. That anything larger rule was usually more like despotic rule or kin-based rule, like tribes and that were kin-based, often more kin-based than political. So Aristotle here wishes to kind of focus things on the political. Now, Aristotle was lost. Aristotle's politics was kind of lost after basically it was ignored. It was basically said immediately after it was written. Everyone said he doesn't address Alexander so much. He doesn't exist larger entities. The polis is kind of irrelevant as a political structure in the new global in the picture post Alexander, post Philip, and then post Alexander, and it kind of therefore ceased. And we know that the Romans didn't get it. It wasn't accessed. The Romans, the Muslims didn't have really to turn to. You don't see Aristotle's politics. You see Aristotle being addressed by the Romans, his rhetoric, his ethics, but not the politics. So much so that some people have argued that Polybius's famous account of cycles of regimes, these are not really done. It's done in ignorance of Aristotle. The only understanding of politics that they had of Aristotle would be found in book 8 of his Ethics, Nicomachean Ethics, and in chapters in the Rhetoric. And they would hide, and the both the Romans, the middle and late Romans, um, uh, and the early Christians of the empire, and then um, the the Muslims relied more on Plato's account in the Republican Laws for this understanding of the polity or the regime. So this is what the purpose of this. Now I'm going a little long here to kind of this is both an announcement series and also kind of the introduction to the what I'm going to be doing. Again, we'll be using the things like I've done elsewhere. We're going to be using Google Books on the screen, and we're going to read it, and then go over it chapter by chapter in that sense. And I'll make some comments and elaborate things. Um, I hope that really does it. The politics gets discovered in the 12th century, 11th, 12th century. It was discovered by Belgian monks, in the monks. William of Moerbeke, in his translations of Aristotle into Latin, the only evidence of there being Aristotle's politics that is first presented in Latin is with Moerbeke, and that is Moerbeke's introduction of Aristotle, translation of the politics into Latin, is a revolution. is a revolution in the political thinking of this 12th century. It leads to a rebirth of political thinking, and it's that rebirth of cities already kind of happened a little earlier in Italy already, in there as the northern cities of Italy sought their autonomy from the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor, and they became independent and autonomous from them, and governed themselves in because they were city states, but that's not really even the correct term. This was a restoration of the kind of civic politics of the Roman, usually the idea of the pre-modern, pre-Roman model, rather than the kind of feudalistic model established of the emperor under Charlemagne, right? And remember, the model that Charlemagne was using was restoring the Roman imperial model of the empire. In fact, the empire that Constantine unifies, right? This kind of unification of a universal rule of an emperor. Okay, this idea that it's an empire of hegemonic, uniform construction. All political life is subsumed into the empire. There is no more politics anymore, just administration in that sense. Therefore, the reassertion of politics in the early 10th, that early part of you can read the social historians about the political historians about that. What happens is that it is when Aristotle through Moerbeke's translation becomes out, it provides a kind of new thinking of a new political science to justify the nature of politics, and it becomes the basis of kind of a early scholastic, early medieval political theory. Now the problem is that scholars like um, Aquinas did not know Greek, and he only knew his Aristotle through Morbic. And Morbic does introduce some in his translation in Latin, does do some create some problems. And one of the problems is one of the things we'll talk about is polity argument. What is a polity? The polity concept, and this is one of the big things that we do. This creates, in other words, a mistranslation of certain words and phrasing of it led to a rethink, a kind of misunderstanding or an interpretive reinforce. They misunderstood the text as Aristotle presented it, or the text that the Greek argued for, or the original Greek argued for, and then then all of a sudden that translation, that error of translation, or that became an error of interpretation, and that became a new teaching what Aristotle taught, and this idea of this tradition of in the scholastic um, in the medieval scholastic tradition of the so-called mixed constitution becomes the basis for this concept of the polity. The politeia called politeia becomes polity, and therefore, and actually, this becomes a big change in how you understood the politics, and there's other things, and then there's as we enter into the later period, I think 15th, 16th century, with the Florentine translator Leonardo Bruni, and his translation in Latin of the politics is a radical alteration of it. That the famous line for Latin was the concept of the political community. The polis is a political koinonia, political koinonia. Well, Morbic translates politicae koinonia as um, politicum communitas, right? As a communitas, community, right? Political community. Whereas Leonardo Bruni translate politicae koinonia as civilis society, civilis societas. The first unit in Latin of that's not it's Cicero has that term also. Cicero used civilis societas in referring to something, in in his laws, which were only discovered in on the Republic, and that wasn't only fully discovered into the 19th century. So more, he wasn't doing that. But some of the other essays, some of the other that Cicero you kind of uses this concept, but this is not what Aristotle would understand as the koinonia, a political koinonia. And I have to talk about this. What is meant by the city, the polis, is a a politicae koinonia. What is a koinonia? What is a thing? We will, all in our readings will look at this. We'll talk about these things. Um, so that's the basic thrust of what I'm going to be doing for this section. This is a little longer. It's more kind of in a series introduction and a teaser of what we'll be looking at. Um, um, and I hope you will join us and please spread the news. Like it, like this, share it with someone, and spread the news. Well, take care. I will stop sharing and we'll stop this thing.